The dust of the trail was not just dirt, it was the color of her life now, brown, dry, and always settling on everything. Ilara huddled against the side of the train depot, a small, shivering bundle in a dress that had seen too many miles. She hadn't eaten a proper meal in 3 days, and the fear in her stomach was a cold, hard knot that never seemed to loosen. She was running from a life of cruelty, and every shadow looked like the man she had escaped. Now she was stuck in a town called Redemption's Gate, a place that promised salvation but looked just as harsh and unforgiving as the world she knew. When the depot master, a man with eyes as cold as glass, finally spotted her, her heart hammered against her ribs. He advanced slowly, his steps heavy on the wooden planks. His words were sharp, demanding she move on, threatening the local jail. Ilara's last sliver of hope crumbled. All she had left was her desperate need to survive, to be small, to be useful. She slid off the wooden bench, sinking onto her knees in the dust, her arms instinctively crossing over her face in a pathetic plea. The words tumbled out, raw and thin, a testament to her terror and her absolute depletion. Please don't hurt me. I'll work. I can clean, I can cook, I'll do anything. Please just don't hurt me. Just as the depot master raised a hand to grab her, a voice cut through the tense silence. A voice that was low, steady, and utterly quiet. It didn't boom or threaten. It simply existed, commanding attention by its sheer lack of emotion. Leave her alone, Dale. A man stood just outside the depot's circle of light. He was large, built like the unforgiving prairie he clearly rode, all weathered leather and strong, silent authority. This was Liam Thorne, the rancher. The town knew him as the silent single dad who ran the biggest, hardest ranch for 50 miles and kept his own counsel. He was a man of immense presence, but always alone, always shadowed by the loss of his wife and the weight of raising his young daughter. He stepped closer, his gaze not resting on Ilara's kneeling figure, but fixed entirely on the depot master until the man grumbled and backed away. Liam looked down at Ilara. His face was a stern mask, deeply lined, and he didn't offer a hand, a smile, or a word of comfort. He just looked at the fear etched into her bones. Ilara was still braced for a blow, ready to repeat her desperate offer of labor, but he simply took off his wide-brimmed hat, rubbed his forehead, and looked out toward the dark, open country he called home. He paused, the silence stretching long and heavy, and then he spoke, his voice carrying the deep resonance of a final, unexpected promise, a word that offered not a job, but a whole new life. He looked her square in the eyes, ignoring her plea to work, and said only 3 quiet words, "Come home." Ilara didn't move for a long moment, the simple command, "Come home," echoing in the vast empty space of the depot. She had begged for work, for scraps, for anything but pain, and this silent giant offered home. It was a word she hadn't known the taste of since she was a girl, and now it felt like a dangerous trap, too good to be true. She finally scrambled to her feet, her gaze locked on the dust motes dancing in the train light, unwilling to meet the rancher's eyes. "Sir, I don't need a home," she stammered, the fear still driving her. "I just need a place to work. I'll do laundry, mend clothes, anything you ask. I promise I'm strong." Liam Thorne said nothing in response to her desperate bargaining. He simply walked to his sturdy buckboard wagon, hitched near the tracks, and reached for the reins. He didn't pressure her, didn't plead, and didn't even look back. He left the choice entirely to her, letting the silence of the night and the immediate threat of the depot master be her guide. After a heartbeat that stretched into an eternity, Ilara ran. She ran not because he ordered her, but because the cold judgment in Redemption's Gate was far more terrifying than the mystery of the silent rancher. She clambered onto the wagon seat beside him, trembling. They rode out of town into a darkness so profound it swallowed all sound except the rolling of the wheels and the soft snorts of the team. The rancher still hadn't said another word, and the sustained quiet was unsettling. It was a silence that demanded nothing of her. No confessions, no promises, no flattery, and that in itself was the kindest thing anyone had offered her in years. She watched his profile, rugged and unreadable beneath his hat. He drove with an efficient competence that suggested deep solitude, a man used to handling his burdens alone. Hours later, the lights of the Thorne Ranch emerged from the prairie blackness, a solid, welcoming silhouette against the horizon. As they drew close, Ilara saw the first unexpected complication, a small, dark shape standing on the porch. A little girl, perhaps 6 years old, wearing a simple nightdress, watching their arrival with wide, serious eyes. This was his daughter, Annie. Liam stopped the wagon, and the sight of his child instantly softened his formidable presence. He climbed down and went straight to her, speaking his second set of words since arriving at the depot. They were whispered, gentle words that only a father would use. Ilara realized with a sudden, painful clarity that this man hadn't been offering a job, nor had he been looking for a wife or a companion. He had seen a creature in pain, and being a father, he had offered the only solution he knew: sanctuary. Liam looked back toward the wagon, his hand resting reassuringly on Annie's shoulder. He didn't ask Ilara to help with the baggage. He simply pointed toward the lamplit kitchen window, where a fire still glowed faintly in the stove, promising warmth. "The spare room is ready. Sleep," he instructed, his voice low. Ilara climbed down, feeling the heavy burden of the past few days begin to lift. She was a fugitive, she was exhausted, but for the first time she was addressed not as a criminal or a commodity, but as a person who deserved rest and a safe place to lay her head. The strange, unspoken contract of her new life had begun. The kitchen was the heart of the Thorn Ranch, and when Ilara woke, the smell of wood smoke and coffee filled the air, the first genuinely comforting aroma she'd experienced in months. She rose from the comfortable cot in the spare room, feeling a profound, almost dizzying gratitude for the simple fact of having slept without fear. The stillness of the morning, however, was broken not by Liam's presence, but by a rhythmic, soft whimper coming from the main room. She found Liam standing rigidly by the kitchen counter, his back to her, looking every inch the formidable rancher, but his shoulders were tight with tension. Annie sat on the floor, clutching a wooden doll, her face pale, small sobs shaking her frame. Ilara realized this was not ordinary morning fuss. This was the quiet, deep grief of a child who had lost her mother, triggered by some small, unseen thing. Liam was completely frozen. He could mend fences, brand cattle, and stare down dangerous men, but he was utterly helpless against his daughter's quiet sorrow. He had no words for this kind of pain. Seeing his vulnerability, Ilara stepped forward without thinking. She knelt beside Annie, not touching her, but simply speaking softly. "Oh, honey," Ilara murmured, her voice warm and low. "That doll is beautiful. But you look like you need a story, not a doll right now." Ilara's past had been filled with hard labor and fear, but she remembered her own mother's gentle ways. She began to weave a tale about a little brown field mouse who was afraid of the big, dark barn, but found courage when she realized the stars were watching her. It was a simple, rambling story, but the rhythmic sound of her voice, so soft and focused, was the balm Annie needed. Slowly, Annie's sobs quieted, and she leaned her head against Ilara's shoulder. Liam hadn't moved. He hadn't interfered, hadn't even acknowledged Ilara's presence, but when the child's whimpering stopped, the tension visibly flowed out of his shoulders. He finally turned, his stern mask momentarily slipping to reveal a brief, deep flash of relief and surprise in his eyes. He poured 2 cups of coffee, pushing one silently toward Ilara. He still hadn't thanked her, or offered a job description, or demanded anything. He simply looked at her, then at Annie, and then out the window at the morning light hitting the mountains. "You said you'd work," he stated finally, his voice low and formal. "The work here is mostly outside. But Annie needs someone who can tell stories." He paused, the first time Ilara had heard him hesitate. She hasn't smiled much since her mama died. He didn't offer a wage, a contract, or even a reassurance of safety. He offered something much more profound. The dignity of being needed for something only she could provide, the gentle task of healing a small, broken heart. Ilara looked from the large, silent rancher to the tiny, trusting girl clinging to her. "I'll stay," Ilara replied, her voice firm, no longer driven by desperation, but by a quiet, deep resolution to protect this fragile home. Ilara threw herself into the work of the ranch house with a fierce dedication that stemmed not from fear, but from a desperate need to earn her place and maintain the fragile sense of safety she'd found. The chores were familiar, sweeping dust that seemed to materialize out of the air, polishing the rough wooden furniture, and most importantly, cooking. She cooked simple, hearty meals and watched, deeply satisfied, as Liam and Annie ate without question. Her hands, once used to trembling, were now steady and capable. Her central, quiet duty, however, remained Annie. The little girl clung to Ilara's presence, not demanding attention, but simply finding comfort in her warmth and her endless, rambling stories of friendly animals and faraway stars. Ilara would brush Annie's hair and tuck her into bed, and in these simple domestic acts, she began to feel the healing power of being needed for kindness, not forced into labor. Liam remained a figure of immense silence. He spent his days in the saddle, managing the vast ranch, returning only for meals and to put Annie to bed. Their conversations were clipped, necessary exchanges. "The well needs drawing, the flower is low." He never asked about her past, never pressed her on why she was so terrified at the depot, and never offered a word of thanks. His quiet acceptance was both a relief and a torment. She knew he didn't judge her, but his reserve kept her constantly braced, waiting for the day he would revoke her unearned grace. One evening after she'd tucked Annie in, Ilara was cleaning the chimney soot when Liam walked in. He didn't speak, just stood by the stove warming his hands. The silence between them felt heavier than usual. Ilara finally broke it, driven by the lingering anxiety of her fugitive status. "Mr. Thorne," she began, wiping her hands on her apron. "I need to know. Are you waiting for me to tell you why I was running? I can leave now if you need me to." Liam turned slowly. He walked toward her, stopping a safe distance away, and for the first time she saw a weariness in his eyes that matched the lines on his face. He didn't answer her question directly. Instead he looked past her toward the hallway where Annie's room was. "When my wife Sarah died," he said, his voice so low Ilara had to lean in to hear the words, "I thought that was the end of everything worth living for. I didn't know how to be a father without her." Annie stopped smiling. He finally looked at Ilara, his gaze intense and vulnerable. "You brought the stories back. You brought the laughter back." He paused, his commitment to her unspoken yet absolute. "You stop running now," he instructed, not as a master, but as a man giving a necessary order to his partner. "This ranch is big enough to hide from any shadow the world puts on you. Just stay for her." The command was a profound reassurance, transforming her anxious flight into a purposeful shared act of protection for a quiet, healing home. The quiet rhythm of the Thorne Ranch was challenged by the brutal reality of the ranching life. A sudden, unexpected storm blew in from the mountains, turning the usually dry creek beds into surging torrents. Liam had to ride out before dawn to check on a section of fence protecting the newborn calves, leaving Ilara alone with Annie. Ilara, despite her terror of being alone and vulnerable, had found a deeper resolve. She focused on the small things, keeping Annie calm by the fireplace and ensuring the kitchen was stocked. But the storm wasn't just rain. Around midday, one of the ranch hands burst into the kitchen, soaking wet and panicked. "Mr. Thorne's horse is back, ma'am." Came back loose and terrified. "The creek near Widow's Bend is running too high. We think the fence line gave out and he might have gone down with it." Ilara's breath hitched, but she didn't collapse into the fear she had carried for so long. She saw Annie's wide, terrified eyes looking at her, and she saw the ranch hand looking for direction. In that moment, Ilara didn't think of Liam as her silent, stoic protector. She thought of him as Annie's father and the man who had offered her unearned grace. She found a strength she didn't know she possessed. "Go get 2 more men," she commanded, her voice surprisingly steady, echoing the clear authority Liam usually carried. "Tell them to take the heavy rope and 2 dry horses. I'll get the lantern and the medical bag." She turned to Annie, kneeling to cup the girl's small face. "Daddy is strong, honey. He just needs a little help. We'll be here when he gets back." Within minutes, Ilara was riding out with the men, the medical bag strapped to her saddle, her eyes narrowed against the driving rain. She didn't know the land like the ranch hands, but she knew Liam's routine. She knew the Widow's Bend was where he always started because the fence there was old. When they reached the churning, muddy creek, they found the fence indeed smashed, and Liam clinging precariously to a half-submerged root on the opposite bank, bruised and struggling against the current. The ranch hands panicked, shouting useless directions, afraid to cross the raging water. Ilara dismounted swiftly. She didn't shout, she analyzed. "The bank is too slick here," she yelled over the roar of the water. "We need a higher anchor point. Joe, you take the rope up to that cottonwood. Anchor it high." Her decisive actions cut through the chaos. She worked alongside them, securing the rope, her hands pulling and tying knots with a fierce, intuitive skill born of necessity. When the rope was secured, it wasn't the ranch hands, but Ilara who insisted on helping guide the rope across the current. She knew the medical bag was useless if they couldn't get him out. When they finally pulled Liam onto the bank, cold, coughing and deeply grateful, he didn't look at his men. He looked straight at Ilara. His mask of stoicism was momentarily shattered, replaced by an expression of profound, wordless honor. He didn't thank her for saving his life. Instead, he looked at her with a raw understanding that she was no longer the desperate fugitive begging for safety, but a partner who had defended their home and their future. He had offered her shelter, and she had returned it with courage and salvation. The unearned grace had been paid back in full. Liam was laid up in bed, suffering from a vicious cold and bruises that laced his ribs, but he was alive. Ilara moved through the house with the efficiency of a nurse and the quiet tenderness of a keeper. She brewed strong teas, changed cold compresses, and most importantly maintain the illusion of calm for Annie, who stayed close by her father's bedside, holding his hand. The experience had cracked Liam's stoicism wider than ever before. He was forced to be still, forced to be dependent, and forced to witness Alara's quiet strength firsthand. One evening, as Alara was checking his fever, their hands brushed. It was a fleeting contact, yet it held more meaning than months of shared silence. Liam caught her hand and held it, his skin hot with fever. His eyes, usually guarded and distant, were heavy with exhaustion and a raw, unmasked gratitude. "You saved my life, Alara," he rasped, the words thick and slow. It was the first true personal thing he had said to her since the depot. "You could have stayed safe in the kitchen. You didn't have to risk the current." Alara didn't pull her hand away. "I risked the current for Annie, Mr. Thorne," she replied honestly, her voice soft but steady. "And for the grace you gave me. I owe you that." Liam shook his head slowly, still holding her hand. "You owe me nothing. You earned your place the moment you showed more courage than any man in the square or on that creek bank." He paused, his grip tightening just slightly. "But you're still looking over your shoulder. That fear will choke you, Alara. Whatever you ran from, tell me. So I know what fences to mend for you." Alara froze. The past was a physical pain, a toxic memory she kept locked away. But looking into Liam's feverish, honest eyes, she knew the time for hiding was over. She couldn't build a safe life here on a lie or a half-truth. "It wasn't a man, not just one," she whispered, her gaze dropping to their joined hands. "It was my husband's family. I inherited a debt I couldn't pay when he died. They wanted to take my child, the child that didn't survive, as collateral for the debt, forcing me into forced labor to pay it off." Her voice broke, the memory a fresh wound. "They treated me like property. When I finally ran, they sent notices. They will come looking for their property. That's the truth of why I begged on my knees at the depot." Liam didn't flinch. He didn't gasp or recoil in judgment. He simply absorbed the horrific weight of her confession. He let go of her hand, but only to place his other hand over hers, sandwiching it between his two strong, bruised ones. "They won't find you here," he stated, his voice now low and utterly resolute, stripped of any pretense of illness. "This ranch is on the edge of the map. And anything that comes to my door looking for property will find a locked gate, a clear rifle sight, and two people who know the price of freedom." He looked at her then, his eyes burning with a promise stronger than any legal contract. "You are not property, Alara. You are home. Now sleep easy." In that shared silence, the last barrier between them, the wall of her fugitive shame, finally crumbled, replaced by a profound, mutual act of trust and protection. With the horrific truth of her past finally shared, a new, deeper quiet settled over the Thorne Ranch. It was a silence free of anxiety for Alara, replaced by the profound assurance of Liam's protection. He never brought up her past again, but his actions spoke volumes. He strengthened the fences, installed heavier locks on the doors, and his eyes, when they rested on her, held a steady, unwavering commitment. Alara was no longer merely safe, she was defended. Her days now flowed with purpose. She taught Annie to read using old ranch ledgers and told her stories not just of magic, but of women who found strength in quiet places. Annie, in turn, began to show Alara the ranch, teaching her the names of the wildflowers and the best places to see the sunset. The girl was healing her own grief by sharing the simple beauty of her home. One clear afternoon, Alara was mending one of Liam's rugged work shirts. Annie sat nearby, drawing with a piece of charcoal on a scrap of paper. She looked up, her blue eyes serious. "Alara," she asked, pointing to a fading, barely visible scar on Alara's forearm, a subtle mark left over from her former life. "What's that?" Alara hesitated, the scar a physical testament to the cruelty she had faced. She had always covered it. Now, sitting in the safety of the Thorne kitchen, she considered the lie she might tell but found she couldn't. Not to Annie. She looked at the little girl, whose trust was so absolute, and chose honesty over evasion. "That, Annie, is a mark from a time when someone tried to take my hope away. They thought they could hurt me and make me afraid forever." Alara took a deep breath, speaking the difficult truth softly, simply. "It shows that bad things happened. But it also shows that I got away. It's a reminder that my body is strong and my will is stronger." Annie looked at the scar, then back at Alara, her brow furrowed in concentration. She then carefully drew a picture, not of the scar, but of Alara standing tall, with a fierce smile, holding a tiny, fluttering bluebird in her hands. "It's not a mark of hurt," Annie declared, pushing the paper toward her. "It's a mark of winning." Ilara felt an emotional floodgate open that Liam's rescue, her confession, and the bandit fight had never managed to budge. Annie's innocent, pure interpretation had transformed her deepest shame into a badge of victory. She finally understood that healing wasn't about forgetting the past, but about changing its meaning. When Liam returned that evening, he saw the charcoal drawing on the counter and the quiet tears that had dried on Ilara's cheeks, tears not of sorrow but of release. He didn't ask. He simply stopped, looked at the drawing, at the woman holding the bluebird, and then looked at Ilara, offering the slightest genuine nod of recognition. It was an acknowledgement of her internal battle fought and won, confirming that in his eyes she was now fully whole and free. The home he offered was not just a place of refuge, but a space where she could finally own her story. The quiet understanding between Ilara and Liam had deepened into a comfortable, unspoken intimacy. They functioned seamlessly as a unit, running the ranch and raising Annie with a shared purpose that felt more profound than a legal bond. They were a family in everything but name and blood. One evening, after the ranch hands had eaten and retired, Ilara found Liam sitting alone on the porch, his gaze lost in the vast expanse of the prairie sky. It was a clear night, and the stars were impossibly bright, casting the surrounding landscape in silver light. She brought out 2 mugs of coffee, handing one to him. "It feels so big out here," Ilara murmured, settling into the chair beside him. The sky. The distance. Back in the town, everything felt closed in, like the walls were pressing down. Liam took a slow sip of the coffee. "The sky doesn't judge," he replied, his voice softer than usual. "It doesn't care who you are or what you've done. It just is." He paused, turning his head slightly to look at her. "It's the only place I've ever felt completely free. I felt free the day you told me to come home," Ilara confessed, the memory still holding its emotional power. "Before that, I was just baggage. Property." She looked down at her hands, then back at the stars. "I don't remember what it was like to just sit like this. To not be watching for danger." A long silence settled between them, charged now not with the tension of her fear, but with the subtle current of their shared future. Liam reached out, his large, calloused thumb gently tracing the faint, healed scar on her forearm, the mark Annie had called a sign of winning. It was the first non-practical touch they had shared, a moment of startling, tender vulnerability. "That scar," Liam said, his voice dropping to a low rumble. "It's a story. Your story. It reminds me how lucky I am that you chose this ranch, that you chose us." He withdrew his hand slowly, leaving Ilara's skin tingling. He didn't offer a declaration of love, but something far more meaningful to her. "You're the strongest fence this place has ever had, Ilara," he stated. He was acknowledging her as his equal, a partner in survival and a cornerstone of his happiness. Ilara knew then, with absolute certainty, that she was no longer just the terrified fugitive who had begged on her knees. She was a woman loved, not just protected, and she had found her true dignity in the silent, sturdy heart of a man who looked past her shame and simply asked her to belong. The quiet moment on the porch under the stars had shifted everything. Ilara and Liam no longer operated on a contract of refuge, but on a foundation of mutual love and respect. The unspoken fear that she might be asked to leave or that her past might still haunt her was finally extinguished. They were a family, and their bond was stronger than any legal document or deed. One Sunday morning after breakfast, Liam stopped Ilara just as she was clearing the table. Annie, sensing the gravity of the moment, paused her drawing and looked up with wide, expectant eyes. Liam still wore his work jeans, his hands rough and stained with the day's labor, but his eyes were clearer and more open than the day she first saw him at the depot. He didn't kneel. He didn't produce a ring forged from mountain gold. Instead, he took Ilara's hand, the one with the faint scar, and held it firmly in his own. "Ilara," he began, his voice low, steady, and carrying the full weight of his years of solitude and his newfound happiness. "I brought you here and told you to come home. I did it to keep you safe from the world. But you didn't just find refuge here, you built this home. You fixed my heart and you made Annie smile again. You're the strength of this ranch and you are the truth of my life." He paused, then looked toward his daughter. "Annie needs a mother, and I need a partner who has the courage to stand with me against any shadow the world can cast. I don't care what debt they said you owed. Your life is not for sale, and your future is not negotiable." He looked back at Ilara, his gaze a binding promise. "I am not asking you to marry me for convenience or for protection. I'm asking you because you are already my wife in every way that matters. I want to make it official so there is never a single doubt, to you, to Annie, or to anyone who rides up to that gate, that you are here by choice, by love, and by right. Ilara's eyes filled not with the tears of fear, but of profound, overwhelming joy. The woman who had once knelt in the dust, begging to work and not be hurt, now stood tall, affirmed by the love of two people. She didn't hesitate. "Yes, Liam," she said, her voice full and strong, a sound of absolute commitment. "I will be your wife. This is my home." Annie cheered, dropping her charcoal to run and hug Ilara's waist, cementing the three of them into an unbroken circle. Liam simply nodded, a silent rancher sealing the deal not with flowery words, but with a profound, honest promise. The following week, a dusty circuit-riding preacher arrived at the ranch. Under the vast, non-judging western sky, with Annie standing proudly beside them, Liam and Ilara exchanged simple vows. Their story wasn't one of rescue, but of mutual salvation, proving that true dignity is found when one person chooses courage, and another offers the simple, powerful grace of home. Decades unfolded across the wide, unchanging prairie, and the Thorn Ranch thrived. It became a beacon of quiet resilience, known throughout the territory not for its wealth and cattle, but for its unbreakable spirit of belonging. Liam and Ilara's love was the sturdy foundation, built not on passion's fire but on the solid bedrock of mutual respect, courage, and shared protection. They raised Annie with an abundance of stories, teaching her that a person's dignity was the one thing no one could ever take. Annie grew up to be a woman who valued kindness over riches and justice over law. She married a quiet, steady man and eventually took over the running of the ranch. The kitchen, where Ilara had first found sanctuary, remained the heart of the home, its wooden table worn smooth by generations of shared meals and whispered hopes. Ilara and Liam grew old together, their hands still reaching for one another with effortless familiarity. Liam's silences grew softer, filled now with the contented peace of a life well lived and well shared. Ilara never forgot the terror of the depot, but it no longer defined her. The faint scar on her forearm became a distant memory, overlaid by the wrinkles of a life of safety and laughter. One cold winter night, sitting by the fire, Liam looked at Ilara, his eyes clear and full of a love that had stood the test of time and cruelty. "Remember that night?" he asked, his voice frail but steady, "when you begged at the depot and I just told you to come home?" Ilara smiled, her hand instinctively resting on his. "I do. I thought it was a trap. I thought I would always be paying back the debt for your kindness." Liam shook his head slowly. "The debt was never yours. It was mine. You paid it the day you walked into this house and showed me how to be a father again. You gave me back my life, Ilara." He paused, his final words echoing the simple, profound truth that had started their journey. "You brought home with you." The Thorn Ranch was never just a location. It was the sacred space where fear was defeated by grace, where a fugitive found a family, and where a silent cowboy discovered that the greatest act of protection is the simple offer of belonging. And that legacy of quiet courage, built brick by honest brick, was the truest testament to the woman who begged for work and was instead given everything. The years eventually claimed Liam and Ilara, but the Thorn Ranch endured under Annie's stewardship. It never became a monument to fame or great fortune, but rather a quiet, living testament to the power of a single act of unconditional grace. The original wooden gate, weathered and leaning slightly, was never replaced. It stood as a silent historian of the family's founding. On a piece of weathered wood, just above the latch, Annie had carved one word, a word she insisted her father Liam had truly meant the day he brought Ilara home: belong. Generations later, the ranch remained a place where lost travelers, whether running from legal trouble or personal heartbreak, often found themselves stopping. They weren't questioned about their pasts or asked to show credentials. They were simply offered a hot meal, a clean bed, and the quiet understanding that only those who have faced immense fear can offer. The silence on the Thorn Ranch remained profound, but it was no longer the silence of judgment or solitude. It was the silence of peace, a powerful, enveloping quiet that affirmed a singular truth. The woman who had once knelt in the dust, begging to work, had been granted the only thing that truly mattered, a place where she was seen, defended, and forever home. Her courage and Liam's unwavering belief in her dignity had turned a piece of remote prairie into an everlasting sanctuary.